And of course, here in Kenya, we have our own story of devolution, decentralization of government functions. And how has that worked over the years for us here in Kenya? And how have other decentralization models worked across the continent? Joining me in studio now is Jean-Pierre Elong Mbasi. He is the Secretary General of UCLGA, and he joins me now to have this conversation basically on the state of decentralization when it comes to Africa. But before we get there, that has been the case here in terms of African states wanting to take on this model of governance. What has been the case across the continent, at least for the countries that have adopted devolution?
Well, thank you for receiving me here, and thank you for availing yourself to inform the public on the key role of decentralization and devolution in improving the governance of our countries. After the democratization process that many countries are embarked in, what followed next was the call for people to be more empowered in the ruling of their own affairs. And decentralization appeared as the way of responding to this demand of people. And Kenya has had a long history of decentralization. But then they embarked into the devolution, sharing of power between the national and the county governments. This is the good move. And it asks also for the county government to also decentralize towards the other levels of government. This is an issue that needs to be addressed later on. Decentralization, devolution are processes, and you cannot rush them without knowing the context, political, social, economic context of each country. But at the level of Africa, almost all countries have embarked into this process. And they went so far that the head of state and government of this continent adopted in June 2014 in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, an African charter on values and principles of decentralization, local governance, and local development that aim at building a convergence of the understanding of what it means to decentralize, what are the requirements, and what each local government and each national government should fulfill in order that we more and more empower people to take charge of their own affairs.
And why has it been such an important approach to take in terms of maybe improving service delivery across various countries? Why is devolution or decentralization so important for Africa moving forward?
You know, I used to say that Africa underwent a series of evolution. One of the key ones was the acquirement of autonomy and independence. And we call it the independence for the elites. And the reality after the 50 years of independence is that people didn't benefit so much. And by 1990s, most of the countries went through a strong demand by the people to be empowered in taking charge of their own lives. So decentralization came as a response to this. And I call decentralization the second independence of the African countries, where the power will go from the elite to the people. So devolution, decentralization is empowering the people. And yeah, there are some risk of confiscation of this by the local elites. But the trend is that of more and more empowerment of the people, including empowerment of women. We created a network of women in local government, and this shows that the movement is going into the right direction.
You mentioned the whole issue of colonization, of course, what that meant for Africa, moving to now the modern Africa that we're experiencing. And some would argue that we haven't really, or most Africans haven't really witnessed a strong modern state in Africa, hence making it very difficult to now decentralize that to local governments. What have been some of the challenges experienced in trying to entrench devolution in some African countries that you've seen?
What do you call a strong national government? Is a legitimate national government. What is more legitimate than a national government that is based and founded and embedded in its society? I think, to the contrary, decentralization builds stronger national government. Devolution builds strong. You see what happened here in Kenya. The way the devolution of the county government had changed the way Kenyan people perceive public governance now. Service delivery have been improved. Right. This is testified by fact. People know that this is happening. So if you extend it all this towards the village, then people will take charge of their lives, and you will share power. Decentralization and devolution is about sharing power. And if we share, then we are all responsible. If we confiscate it, then we can be blamed for doing things for me without me. You know, in our tribe, we say, what you do for me without me, you do it against me. So bringing people together is the essence of decentralization and devolution.
So you mentioned, of course, how it's helped bring power back into the hands of the people, at least from the elites. In the case for Kenya, how would you judge our progress so far?
You know, Kenya is the one state on earth that decided to decentralize to the county government all that they could. And they did it at once. Not progressively. They say, okay, now we share the power between the county government and the national government. And we devolve this power to the county government. Of course, this devolution was a very important move. But at the same time, taking responsibilities means that you have to be capacitated or to have the capacity to deliver on the responsibility you have taken. So sometimes accompanying decentralization of competencies with decentralization of resources is not an easy task. Right. So we think the way the Kenyan government and the Kenyan county governors and even the county assemblies has set up processes of conversation between the two levels of government, give us a good hope that progressively the hurdles that are encountered will be addressed.
And what are some of those hurdles? Because you mentioned how Kenya did it one-off. Yes. It was not progressive. Yeah. And literally you're seeing fiscal, administrative, even political power now being given to the various counties. What challenges have you seen, at least coming out of the Kenyan story, could we change and deal with?
Well, first of all, context matter. Timeline matter. And the political culture matters. So you need to take all this into account to see how people will grapple with these new responsibilities. And it goes from the leadership of the counties and the national government to the people themselves, so that they know that this division of work between the national and the county is also their responsibility on the accountability that should be put in place. And they have to play a role in that. If we need progressive, developmentalist, local and national governments, you need also citizens that hold the leaders accountable and processes that are in place for this to be.
Let's talk about the African Charter. It's on the values, principles of decentralization. Why is it so important, and have you had enough African states sign on to this and be invested in this initiative?
The head of state thought it is important to have a rallying document that will say how are we going to give back the power to the people. This was adopted in 2014, June. Up till now, only 3 countries have signed and ratified the Charter. 12 have signed it but not ratified. We need 15 countries to have signed, ratified, and deposited the instrument to the African Union Commission to have the Charter become a legal instrument of the African Union. So my call is for Kenya first to sign it and ratify it. Kenya has not signed it. And many countries in East Africa didn't sign it. The only country, the 2 only countries that signed it and ratified it are Burundi and Madagascar in East Africa. All the others, despite the fact that the head of state has decided this, are still not active in taking the step towards the ratification and the depository of instrument at the African Union.
So what does this charter specifically call for? What does it require the member states to do?
It defines what is decentralization in devolution. It defines the kind of relation that we have to have between all the spheres of government. It defined cooperative governance, interrelation between the level of governance. It defined the citizen control on the way our local government are run. It defined the accountability system that we should be putting in place. Because at the end, decentralization should address local development and the improvement of the living condition of people. So the Charter encapsulates all these. And the African state member to the Charter should submit an annual report on the implementation of the Charter. We, as UCLG Africa, we took the step to rate the African countries against their friendship to local governments. And we did it in 2012, we did it in 2015. In 2012, Kenya was rated maybe number 9. In 2015, Kenya was rated number 2. It means you can improve or you can be expelled from the good people, the good standing in the implementation of the decentralization policies. And unfortunately, from the rating of 2015, only 5 countries on this continent are friendly to local government. And you have 15 or more than 15 that are adverse to local government. So you have a lot to do to improve the situation of decentralization on the continent.
So you've mentioned 5 countries
Yes.
On the continent that support decentralization, and then
or
of course
implement it the way it is stated in the legal instrument.
Right. And of course now we have 3 countries that have ratified and have agreed with it.
Yes.
Why are we dealing with a majority of African countries that do not want to embrace this model?
I don't know if you know that if you had the power in your hand and they tell you share it, how will be your feeling? Are you going to lose power at all? Are you going to be less important than before? And people are hesitating because they don't understand, or they don't see the evolution where our countries are heading to. I told you the first independence was for the elites. Decentralization brings the second independence. The first independence was a fight. Decentralization will be the fight as well. And people will be more and more demanding on taking control of their lives. And the elite will have to compromise on this. They will follow. The head of state were foresight looking. Now the elite should follow. And I think we're heading there. There is no way out of this movement.
Of course, you mentioned, and it is a warranted fear of many governments not wanting to cede over power. But what would then be the ideal model? And of course, we can't give a blanket model for all African countries. But in terms of devolution and decentralization, what could work? Because the fears you're talking about were legal authority to the sub-national units, degree of autonomy. How will they operate in relation to the central or national government? The patterns of accountability. Who is going to answer to who once we decentralize power? But at least from the models that you've seen that have worked on the continent, what would be the ideal one?
We preach for participatory governance, which means that everybody should be able or empowered to have a say on the way government at all levels run the public affairs. This is the ideal model. How can I be a citizen which voice counts for the ruling of the collective future of my community? Now, I told you it depends on the situation and the context, on the history, on the timeline you take, given the history and the context, and the economic situation, and the cultural behavior pertaining to openness in terms of politics. If your interpretation of democracy means that if you have 41%, you take it all, and the 49% are ignored. Or if you have a culture of sharing, which means that you take into account those concerns of those people who didn't vote for you, then you begin to enter in the new culture, political culture, of taking care of everybody. So decentralization gives the capacity to do that, to get people involved in the management of their societies, and to get people recognized in their own right and dignity.
Yeah.
It is very critical to have people recognized. And as I said, people know best at the level or where they live what is best for them. So listening to people is something that our elite should learn again.
And speaking of which, we want to look at a few sound bites, at least from the Turkana Governor, Josephat Nanok, speaking about the duplicity of roles when it comes to national and county governments and what problems that could pose moving forward. Take a listen to this.
The bigger challenge which we are discussing with our national colleagues now is the duplicity in the law, the duplicity to the county government, but also the duplicity provided to the cities and municipalities when it comes to matters of revenue, local revenue raising.
People are now going to the rural areas, very serious professionals are now going back to look for jobs in the county governments, and people are looking for business opportunities in their mother counties. So I believe we are already successful with devolution.
All right, so 2 points raised there. One is the duplicity between the national and county governments. Let's deal with that first before we deal with the second concern, which seems to be a reversal of urbanization. People now going back to their rural homes to find opportunities. But let's first talk about sometimes the overlapping of roles between national and county governments.
The Constitution and the legal instrument are clear. The division of role are clear. The provision of services to the people are the responsibility of the county governments in Kenya. And in every country in Africa, this happened. In Kenya, it happened at once. In others, it evolved. But at the end, those who face the public in the service delivery are local or subnational government. So this duplicity comes in an interim period where you need adjustment. And this is what I refer to as a timeline. You need to know that, yes, you can give responsibilities, but for me to grasp and to implement the whole responsibility that are given to us is not as immediate that I will wish to. So you need some time of this duplicity, but not all the time. You need to have a timeline of, let's say, 1 mandate of county government, and then it will be clearly. But it doesn't mean that cooperation between level of government should not be there. Cooperative governance is key because there are many issues that cannot be handled at only one level of government. It's a multi-level and it is horizontal. So you need both. You need a clear devolution, but you need also a cooperative governance between national and the other spheres of government.
Let's talk about urbanization, because that seems to be the new headache for many African cities, people moving from rural areas to the urban centers. But before we get there, we heard from one of the speakers that we're seeing an interesting dynamic since devolution took place of people now choosing to come back to their rural areas looking for opportunities. In your view, is this significant enough? Is there such a big number of people moving back to the rural areas that it is a dynamic we need to start paying attention to?
Well, you know what? Let's be frank. Urbanization is the horizon of habitat on Earth. We are taking the road late, but we're heading towards there. Africa is the most rapidly urbanizing continent, and the flow to urban will not stop up till we reach the moment by 2100 where we have the equilibrium between the birth and the death, what they call demographic transition. So Africa will have to house between now and 2050 the equivalent, the city of Africa, the equivalent of nowadays population of the continent. So the trend is a massive one. And the pace is unforeseen in the history of humanity. It took Paris in France 1 century to go from 500,000 people in 1810 to 1 million people in 1910. 1 century. It took Lagos 25 years to have the same journey between 1950 and 1955. Lagos is 500,000 new citizens a year. It is nobody have seen this happening in history. So Africa have to cope with a massive urbanization. And the first move should be to recognize this. Many national governments still think that they can resist urbanization. This is a lost battle. Just recognize that will be happening, and that if this happens, it should be organized, and it should be turned into an asset and not be resisted. So this is my first consideration. The second one of decentralization, making people going back to their villages. Yeah, this is for the elite, of course. Because, you know, the decentralization open up the political market. Because, you know, the national elite is confined in this parliament, judiciary, government. Is very limited number of posts, of position that people can get. If you open up decentralization, then you give more possibilities to the elite to go and conquer over position in the, and this move, yes, is observed, but this is the bonus of decentralization.
So it's more of political opportunity, yes, exactly, than anything else when, yes, we're looking at devolution. But
and not return to the country.
In terms of business or development. No. But when do you think we could actually see something like that? Because the whole point of devolution is to see better development on the ground.
But development is local, it doesn't exist. Every business is local. The issue is, if you accept not to concentrate everything in Nairobi, and give opportunity for, let's say, procurement to be dealt with in other areas than Nairobi, then people will move there to seize these opportunities. And you start building a decentralized economy. But the market is local. The national economy, or I used to say it, the national economy doesn't exist. The national economy is the congruence of local economies. So it's at local level that you build the economies. But for that to be, you don't need to concentrate all amenities in one place. If you distribute the amenities, then you will distribute the economic growth as well.
You mentioned urbanization is something that cannot be ignored by African cities. So now, in terms of seeing it as an opportunity, how can African cities begin to be more strategic in managing this issue? And I'm just looking through some of the statistics saying by 2050, 60% of the populations will live in cities, up from the current 40%. So we're looking at a huge jump in the next couple of years. How can African cities now hone this and use it to their advantage?
Number one, you should recognize it. Ignorance has been the first move of African leaders towards urbanization. 10 years ago, all the discourse was saying Africa is essentially an agricultural continent when people were moving to cities. Now, turning cities to assets means that you should first recognize that the majority of Africans live in cities. Okay? If you recognize that, so you improve their life where they live, at least. And then you can turn it to an asset by acknowledging that 60% of the GDP of this continent is produced in cities. It means that if cities fail, your economy will fail. So how do you empower cities so that they grow the economy and by so doing grow the whole economy of the continent? But guess what? There's no single summit of the African Union that dealt with cities. It is not on the agenda. This is our fight to put the decentralization and the cities on the agenda, or the political agenda and the political priority of Africa. And remember, we're all going towards an urbanized world. And we are the latest to embark in this. We have to catch up on what the others are doing. And we have to invent how we are going to do that. If we take the same route than those who preceded us, high carbon pathway to the development, the world will be lost. So we have to invent in Africa a low carbon, a transition towards a sustainable development that care about how we link the city with the ecosystem, how we balance the population that will live in big cities, medium-sized cities, small cities, and the villages, how we care about the human settlement as a whole, a system of human settlement as a whole. This requires knowledge, it requires political will, and it requires planning, which we lose sight because of the structural adjustment. You remember the structural adjustment? It was a quarter-to-quarter planning. We need a long-term planning, 50 years, just like Agenda 2053. But we'll need a urban dimension of this Agenda 2053 that is not there yet.
So you mentioned the importance of putting African cities back onto the political agenda for the continent. There's the Afri-Cities Conference coming up. And of course, the theme is transition towards sustainable cities and territories, the role of African local governments. They're very instrumental in ensuring that they succeed. Yeah. So tell us why this theme and what more will be discussed in these Afri-Cities Conference.
Why the theme? You remember we upload the signing of the Paris Agreement, saying that we need to take a new path towards growth and development that harm global warming, limited global warming to 2 degrees maximum, and even lower than 2 degrees. And you know that at the Paris summit, local government endeavor to do more than the nationally determined contribution of the state, so that we lower even this ceiling to 1.5 degrees. It means to have a role to play. And as I told you, Africa is the newcomer in urbanization, but it's a massive move towards cities. If we don't adopt the needed low carbon pathway to the development, the whole world will be impacted. So our responsibility is used not only for our people, because the consequences of global warming we are witnessing with the floods, drought, the sea level that is coming up. So we need to address seriously this issue of climate change. And this is why we call for local government in Africa to be part of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Because you know that energy is one of the main contributors to global warming. And the strategy on energy is linked with the strategy on transport, strategy on production and consumption, and so on. So we need to reflect on those and to see how the local government of Africa will contribute to reduce the risk of global warming or to reduce the contribution of Africa in global warming. We didn't contribute much, but we don't need to contribute that much. Yeah. We need, to the contrary, to lower the contribution.
You mentioned the need for African cities, local governments to be more environmentally conscious moving forward. Are any really there and wanting to commit themselves to curbing climate change, for instance? You were talking about low carbon emissions and how critical that will be moving forward. But what is UCLG doing to ensure that more African cities and local governments adopt such policies?
I told you we set up this global conference of mayors for sub-Saharan Africa. We are encouraging our cities to be part of it. We set up what we call the UCLG Africa Climate Task Force to prepare to help local government prepare projects that address this issue of climate change, and to prepare projects that can be funded by the Green Climate Fund that was put in place in Paris, and that will avail $200 billion a year to help developing countries to address the issue of climate change. So we are doing our best to sensitize our members, right, and to have them working more on this climate agenda.
And how receptive have they been to that agenda so far?
They are. They are. We have a lot of, for now we have more than 20 cities already members of the Covenant of Mayors, and we will have at a few cities one of the big meetings of the Covenant of Mayors to see how far we have gone.
Let's talk about SDGs, because when it comes to involvement of local authorities, it's critical at least to ensure that we do achieve these SDGs, as more than 65% of the implementation begins from the grassroots. So we need to engage as much as we can to local governments. What is UCLG doing to ensure that that engagement is happening to achieve the SDGs?
The SDGs are the bread and butter of local government. If you take the SDGs about women empowerment, one of the targets is to bring all girls into school by 2030. There is no local government in Africa which is not doing that, trying to do that. And this is why we are calling our members to translate their policy in the language of SDGs, so that they report on what they are doing already. That will then participate into the reporting of each country on the way they are implementing the SDGs. So this educating them on how to measure what they are doing, how to report on what they are doing, and how to verify what they are doing is what we are busy doing with our members.
So localizing the SDGs agenda, at least for the different member states moving forward?
Well, this was called for by the international community. Unless they are localized or unless they are recognized as being dealt with, right, at the local level, there is no way they can be implemented.
And as we wrap up, what lessons do you think can be learned from various governments that have taken on devolution, like Kenya? What lessons can they offer to other member states?
Don't fear decentralization. Get into it. Learn from it. It only improves the way you are perceived as a government at the service of the people. And don't be shy in sharing the lessons that you learn, the hurdle that you encounter, and the advice that the people are giving to you. But you cannot evolve in the governance of your country if you don't devolve power to the people.
We barely talked about the actual conference of UCLG and, of course, what they're doing yesterday and today. But what can people actually know about this conference and why is it so critical at this time?
We are here to prepare for this gathering of Africities in Marrakesh from 20th to 24th. Each region should come prepared to this gathering. And normally we will hold our General Assembly where the leadership of our organization will be renewed. So each region will have to designate 9 people to sit on what we call the Local Government Council, African Local Government Council. Then 15 people to sit on our executive committee, 5 people to sit on our presidency, and from where we elect the president. So it is a very important meeting. But also the topic that we are covering is so important. So each region should come prepared to table what they do. And we are here to assess the situation of decentralization devolution in East Africa. And it is encouraging in some countries, but it's still a concern in some others. So we want to learn from each other how we can partner, do peer learning, so that we all together improve on this issue of devolution decentralization.